From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's what's ahead. K-State's Romulo Lollato will report on the findings from his latest wheat variety forage production trial. The information useful to you cattle producers who graze calves or cow herds on wheat pasture in the fall and winter. Also, K-State's Sandy Johnson on the principles of good record keeping for the commercial cow-calf herd. She'll go over the kinds of recorded information of value to you producers. Later, K-State's Cheryl Boyer on a special webinar for a new project which will investigate the impact of the pandemic on our food and agricultural systems. And K-State's Charlie Lee is back for his weekly wildlife management segment. All that straight ahead on Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local Extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
We're glad to have you along for this Agriculture Today here on the K-State Radio Network. Let's talk winter wheat around Kansas, and eventually we'll get into new information out from K-State Research and Extension on wheat variety forage yield, something our guest and his colleagues have been evaluating for a number of years now. We're talking once more with wheat production specialist Romulo Lollato of K-State Research and Extension. First, though, Romulo, as we tend to do every time we visit, we'll ask you for your latest observations and word on the street about the state of the Kansas winter wheat crop. Once more, considering that it's been dry across a good part of Kansas, our recent moisture yesterday notwithstanding.
Hi, Eric. Yes, well, thanks for having me on air. It's always a pleasure to be here and talking with you and with the listeners. You summarized it really well. It has been dry, right? And that dryness has extended from the fall, back when the winter wheat crop was planted. And, of course, is worse in some areas of the state. So, for example, this moisture of yesterday, it was mostly concentrated in the south-central part of the state, which definitely was needing some moisture, but was not the part of the state that was in the greatest need of moisture, right? In fact, if we look at north-central Kansas, northwest Kansas, they have been in a really tough spot out there. Talking to some of the growers in that region, some of them are thinking that the crop might not even make it through the winter, again, because of a combination of such dry conditions and cold spells as well. And so that combination, especially because of the dryness, has some growers thinking whether the crop is going to fare through the winter here or not. There's been some talk as well in these cases where the crop might not make it or might have a much reduced yield potential, again, because of these dry conditions, of perhaps planting some spring wheat acres. There's been some conversation about that. I've been receiving some emails, especially growers in that north central, northwest part of the state, considering the possibility of planting some spring wheat. I think it's important to remember, listeners there, that it will not be the first time that spring wheat gets planted on Kansas, right? Even I think last year we had several thousand acres actually of spring wheat around the state, especially in the northwest part of the state. But the spring wheat usually is going to be much later, going through the important parts of the development that determine grain yield, right? So, for example, it's going to head out much later than a winter wheat crop. It's going to go through grain field under much hotter conditions as well. And because of that, we usually see about half of the potential in spring wheat as we have on winter wheat, at least for this region here in Kansas. So again, just important to remind that. I know the growers are concerned with the state of their wheat crop. I like to remind that the wheat is quite a tolerant crop to many of these environmental stresses. That's part of the reason why we have so many acres in Kansas, Colorado, and in the Great Plains in general. But yes, definitely needing some moisture, Eric. Southwest part of the state, all of western Kansas in pretty rough shape, north central Kansas as well. And with this most recent moisture, it has brought some relief to south central Kansas, parts of central Kansas, and then definitely southeast part of the state, although we don't have too many wheat acres in that region.
The next couple of months actually will be critical to pushing that wheat crop along, and we'll be tracking that very carefully, of course, with you. Romulo, something that, again, you have been collecting last few years, the forage output of various winter wheat varieties, of course, for grazing purposes here. And you've just finished up compiling your results from this past fall's evaluations here. Tell us in more detail why you are interested in developing this information.
So, Eric, I think whenever we think of grazing wheat pastures, I think growers in this region kind of take it for granted that they have this opportunity. But if you go to any other region in the States or even around the globe, it's rare for you to have an environment that allows the wheat to be grazed and then still go out and be harvested for grain, right? The reason it works well in this region is because the winter wheat is planted in the fall, produces a good amount of biomass, and then it goes dormant, but it's not 100% covered by snow, and perhaps it's not even 100% dormant because we have a relatively warm winters in especially south central Kansas and south from there into Oklahoma and Texas. So that combination of relatively warm winters allows the crop to be grazed by cattle during the winter and then still go for yield later on. So that's the reason why we measured one of these components, which is forage yield. Now, if we think of acreage that is grazed every year, some of our surveys were kind of suggesting 12 to 15% of Kansas wheat acres are grazed into a dual-purpose system every year. If we go south to Oklahoma, that goes up to 50, 55, and even 60%. So very important production practice here in the region. With that in mind, one of the things that is important, of course, is the amount of forage that is produced. And we are measuring that in this trial. Another important factor is how late in the spring can we graze these varieties. And we're also going to measure that. That's called first hollow stem. So we always have a series of articles that come out in the spring where growers can see the development of the first hollow stem in different varieties. And of course, how well can each one of these varieties recover from that stress that is grazing, either through defoliation, right, removal of leaves, or through trampling of the wheat plants. So we try to see how well these varieties can respond to grazing. So the first thing, forage, we have already measured in this trial, as we do every year. And important to remember that this trial is located in Atkinson, so it will be kind of the northern fringe of where wheat is grazing in the region. And then the other two things, so responsiveness to grazing and first hollow stem, will be measured later in the spring and also made available.
Give us a quick roundup of the forage output and comparisons here. And you had some 34 varieties in the trial, somewhere along that line?
Yeah, so these are all commercial entries, right? Companies can enter their varieties into this trial, and then we do all the measurements. And this year we had 34 varieties. These usually range from 25 to 40. So we were right on average this year with the number of varieties entered. And we have several commercial varieties that are already available. And we also have some lines of different breeding programs who are evaluating those varieties before releasing. Now, whenever I talk about forage production, a few of the things that really affect forage production are mostly environmental, right? So if we have enough moisture and enough nitrogen out there, usually, and warmer temperatures, this allows for a lot of production of forage. I mean, we have measured north of 3,000 pounds of dry matter per acre in the fall, so sometime in December in previous years. So weather is a big determinant of that. Then we also, of course, have management of sowing date and seeding rate and things like this that also can improve or not the biomass production now. In these trials, they were planted earlier. So they were probably planted the mid of September time frame to maximize forage production. And they were planted at 120 pounds of seed per acre, so a pretty high seeding rate there just to ensure we have maximum forage production. So from the management perspective, we gave everything that we could. The nitrogen fertility was high, the soil pH is at optimal levels as well. However, the weather really restricted forage production during this fall. Even though we planted, and right after we planted, we had a nice rainfall, so we actually had a pretty good moisture, and the emergence was excellent and very uniform in terms of emergence. The amount of forage production in the fall was relatively low. In fact, we were ranging from about 470 pounds of dry matter produced per acre to about 1,000, just north of 1,000 pounds of dry matter per acre. And again, that didn't necessarily depend on variety. There were no differences among the varieties. I think because of as dry as we were. Although, on average there, we were producing about 740 pounds of dry matter per acre this last fall.
So as producers might look at that data, they need to keep that in mind. The difference maker, again, the dryness, not necessarily the potential of those varieties to produce forage. The dry weather was the equalizer, so to say.
Definitely. For the data that was collected in the fall, that's definitely true. Now, we will do something unusual for this trial, which we will go back and measure it again after the winter, just to make sure that, if there are any differences between the varieties there, we want to be able to know that. So far, during the fall, we were not able to detect any differences, but perhaps during the spring, we might be able to. So we will measure it again at time of grazing termination.
It's worth noting, though, once more, you've been running this trial for several years in a row now, and you'd invite producers not only to consider the results that came from this past fall, but to look at the running performance of varieties in their forage output over several years' time.
Yeah, so we have been doing this trial since 2015. That was the first planting year of this trial, so harvesting 2016. And we are actually now just starting a collaboration with Oklahoma State University because OSU has been doing this for several years. So we will combine this data all together, and we're really going to try and hammer down what is affecting forage production in the fall.
Very well. If producers would like to see the actual data you came up with, the forage dry matter for each of those 34 varieties, you have an article in the recent Agronomy e-Update newsletter that covers all of that. Go to agronomy.KSU.edu and check the latest edition, which came out this past Friday, the 22nd of January. Romulo, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining us once more.
Thank you, Eric.
He's a wheat production specialist with K-State Research and Extension, Romulo Lollato. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we'll return shortly. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. For you commercial cow-calf producers now, some thoughts on the value of good record keeping. And yes, we're still early in the calendar year. It's a good opportunity to get your herd records in shape, our guest tells us. Sandy Johnson recently put together an article on this topic in the Beef Tips newsletter out of K-State. She is Research and Extension Beef Cattle Specialist for the university based in northwest Kansas. So, Sandy, there are any number of reasons for keeping up good records on the herd, and you think this year there may be added value in doing that?
Right. I think the early part of the year is we're thinking resolutions, and if there was anything in your record-keeping system last year that let you down, it seems like a good time to be thinking about that and making improvements. And then looking at the current drought map and the long-term precipitation outlook for much of Kansas doesn't look very bright. So it could be, if not this year, we're always one day or year closer to the next drought, and a good set of records can make any culling needed because of drought easier and perhaps less stressful if we feel like we have good information to use in making those decisions.
And that information needs to be collected and updated on a frequent basis. That's part of the secret, anyway, to solid record keeping, is it not?
Right. And, as we think about, probably record keeping has a bad connotation in many people's minds. And, we're fortunate in the time we live in that we have some tools that may be helpful for us, but we still need a system and something that will work for us. But in order to build that system, we really need some goals and, what do we need records for?
Give us some examples of those primary goals that the commercial cow-calf operator might shoot for.
Well, the first thing that comes to many people's mind is individual records, and we'll talk about that. But I think more importantly is to make sure that we have those herd records, because we're feeding cows as a group, not as individuals, and the overall herd performance and how that relates to your the financial side of your operation is very important. And so we want to be able to track those things that help us determine a unit cost of production, or what it costs us to produce a pound of weaned calf. And that also means then that we need to understand where production losses occurred. Did we fail to get cows pregnant? Did they lose pregnancy between the time you preg checked and they calved? Were lots of calves lost around the time of birth? Our hope is that things go well, and you may say, well, I keep track of those things, but I don't really use them. Those are insurance type of records that if you have a major calamity from whatever reason, health or something in the feed that causes pregnancy loss, knowing what your normal is going to help you track that down sooner. And so those herd records are vitally important, not only to track that performance of the herd over time, but also make sure we understand how that combines with our financial records.
One could look at their overall herd with a good set of records, but then break this down even further to individual animal records, which will then lend to a whole set of herd management decisions, correct?
That's right. And I guess just, clearly a seed stock producer is going to have much more extensive records in that regard than a commercial producer. But even so, the goals of those individual operations are going to determine what individual records are needed. In some cases, if we have a cow with a bad udder or a really lightweight calf, we might remember one or two individuals. But when we go to that situation, thinking about where we may have to cull more, that's where some of those additional detailed records are very important. And I often think of birth dates being important in my heifer selection decisions. Did the dam have any calving difficulty problems? Any feet or leg issues? Occasionally we haven't had problems with a particular trait, and maybe it's udders or feet. We get into some genetics where it becomes an issue. So we have some good scoring systems that you can access through the Beef Improvement Federation website or the calving book we have from our K-State bookstore. There are some standard scoring systems there that allow you to simply record a number based on, somebody's already created a scale for you, no need to create your own. And so you can track issues of udder problems with the dam, if there were calving difficulty, anything that's pertinent to your operation. And that's where it's important to have those goals and where your herd is at in terms of needing to change particular traits. So a producer that raises replacements probably has a much more extensive need for records than someone that purchases replacements. But even so, again, thinking about what you might cull in the case of a drought, then knowing cow age, perhaps the source of the genetics of those cows might factor into your culling decisions.
And as far as those replacement heifers go, and you mentioned age there's a target that you'd like to see producers shoot for. The calves that are born in that first, 3 weeks of the calving period, they tend to perform better as a female in the herd over time. Is that correct?
Right. If they're born early, they have an age advantage. Okay, so they tend to cycle sooner, they come in heat sooner, and as we look at large data sets of those heifers that were born early, they retain that advantage, and that's not only in pregnancy rate, but their advantage in terms of extra calf weight from those calves being slightly older is almost an additional whole calf worth of weaning weight. All right, so that's a really important one that we can use by knowing the birth dates of those replacement heifer calves. And if we don't want to write down individual birth dates, group them by week or whatever, put a different color tag in them, put a notch in the tags of the later born calves, however you want to do it. You wouldn't have to write down the birth date to identify those that are older. It's important to know what can help your operation if your heifers are not staying in the herd for a long time as they mature. That's certainly one to look at.
And you mentioned it just briefly here. Those ear tags can be quite a reservoir of information with a simple series of notching for identifying that this female or that has this issue or that. And that's pretty handy, you think, Sandy?
Right. And, say a cow is in the chute because you need to help with that calf to nurse. Well, let's put a little notch in her tag. It's like one strike. And I don't know how many strikes until you're out, but, you put that notch in your tag. If you had to assist her at calving, I think that would be a separate notch from perhaps the assisting with nursing, depending on if that was the calf week from a extended parturition process or, a poor udder quality. So there's ways that you can simplify that, not having to write it down, but still have some record of the information.
Well, you mentioned that K-State's cow-calf record book can be very helpful along the line of putting together and keeping a quality set of records for the commercial operation. There's another source out of Oklahoma State University, you note likewise, Sandy, that can serve a purpose here.
Right. As people are thinking about what records do I need to keep, Oklahoma State has, for the last several years, now they're probably due for another update, but they've essentially surveyed the companies that produce some cow-calf record-keeping software. So they kind of itemize the different things that they can keep track of and a little bit more about how some of the reports that they generate. And in some ways, it's way more than any one individual may be thinking about if you haven't kept many records right now. But I think it really kind of helps you process what could be and think about what you truly need as you're looking at this, extensive list of what some of these programs can do. And it probably doesn't surprise us that the software can do that. The question is, what can we put to use in our operation?
Customize it as you might, but look at these materials and what guidance they can provide in developing your herd records. But that is the point here, Sandy. In closing, if you haven't developed those records to the fullest extent, this is a great time to start, as good as any anyway.
Right. Think about what you need to make decisions, whether it's year-to-year management decisions or in a drought situation. And I hope you don't need the drought situation this year, but better to be prepared because we will have another drought at some point.
Hey, good input as always, Sandy. Thanks for joining us right here.
Glad to be here.
Research and Extension Beef Production Specialist Sandy Johnson. She has put together an article on this, Data for Decisions by title, in the most recent Beef Tips newsletter out of K-State. You can find that at KSUbeef.org. We'll return with more on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Well, a multi-region, multi-institution research team investigating the impact of COVID-19 on food and agricultural systems will be hosting a free webinar for those engaged in the food supply chain at any level. That'll take place this Thursday, January 28th at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It's an hour-long webinar. It's part of the Lessons from COVID-19 Regional Food Supply Project. And K-State horticulturist Cheryl Boyer is one of the researchers leading that.
On Thursday at 1 o'clock, we have the first of a series of 4 webinars that will be released over the coming 2 years that are part of an AFRI, which is part of the United States Department of Agriculture, the USDA. It's their National Institute of Food and Agriculture. And early after the pandemic began last year, they came out with a COVID rapid response grant program, and I am part of a team that received funding to look at the disruption of the food system. So as you all know, there were some tense moments shortly after the stay-at-home orders happened where we were trying to figure out how to get meat on the table and how to address plant processing issues. And it played out differently everywhere across the country. And so this team that I'm a part of is located in 3 different areas of the United States. The first one is Minnesota, Wisconsin area, large sort of metro areas. Then there's one in Florida and one in Southern California. And so we're developing instruments, survey instruments that can evaluate what happened and how we can mitigate this if it happens again in the future, and how we can figure out how to make our food systems function during any kinds of disruptions. It may not be a pandemic. It may be a natural disaster. It may be any number of things. So we're trying to understand what happened in this particular situation so that we can make sure that we can minimize disruptions to food systems and even switch over to different practices. And what those practices are and how we're going to manage those systems is the subject of the grant that I'm a part of. And so this first webinar on Thursday is really just introducing the team to you. We've got this team that's covering the whole United States, just letting you know what sorts of deliverables we're planning to create. We will have an online course and we'll have an online conference that are related to helping people learn the results of the research that is generated from this project and how they can apply it locally. So we'll be sharing that. I'll be sharing more about that over the next couple of years. But to get it kicked off, our very first webinar is Thursday, and we want to share everything that we've got going on.
Cheryl, briefly, whom are you aiming this at, this initial seminar anyway?
You know, this can be for anyone that is involved in the food system, from producers to extension to trucking companies to grocery stores, anybody who is a part of that system and wants to figure out how to help navigate it in the future. So even if you're part of a food pantry or you are part of some sort of local resource, a school system, we have some really great examples even here in Kansas of some unique ways that we found to get food prepared for people. And the way the webinar sign up is situated, it's free, of course. The webinar is already set up as a set of 4 recurring webinars. We've set those dates already. And if you sign up once, you'll be reminded for all of them. So you don't have to worry about signing up again and again and again and again. It will be just once and done. And so there's a short URL for that. You may not remember it if it's on the radio. So if anybody has interest in this, just reach out to me. My email is crboyer, Boyer, at KSU.edu. So, but we're excited about it, and we think it'll be really important to the future of our country and the sustainability of our food systems.
K-State's Cheryl Boyer there. Now here's K-State's dairy specialist, Mike Brouk, with Milk Lines. Mike?
Today I'd like to talk to our Kansas dairy farmers concerning some of the things we're seeing in the feed market. I know many of you have probably been watching the prices of soybean meal and other protein sources, and I think it's something that we probably need to keep a close eye on as we move into the next probably 6 months to maybe 8 months of the marketing cycle. Most of you are aware that we've seen soybean prices increase by about 60% here in the last 4 to 5 months. As we look at that, that's also caused a significant increase in soybean meal prices as well, and most of our proteins have moved along with that. This has also been magnified by the fact that the corn has increased in price as well. So what are some things that we need to think about as we look to the next few months and some things that we need to be doing? First, you need to be having some real serious conversations with your nutritionist if you haven't already started doing that. You really need to look at the types of different proteins that might be available in your marketing area, things other than soybean meal. Yes, they will generally track along the soybean meal prices, but there may be some savings depending on what is locally available. So pay attention to where we're at on prices of things like distillers' grains or corn gluten feed, or maybe even some of the supplemental amino acids. Some other protein sources out there that we don't often use but could use in times like these would be things like cottonseed meal or canola meal, or in some cases even sunflower meal might be a better buy on a basis of crude protein than soybean meal at this point. But these all contain different amounts of amino acids and different ratios of amino acids. So you really need to work with your nutritionist to decide what is the best choice for your herd. And another thing that we sometimes forget to consider in this is alfalfa hay. With the increase in soybean meal prices, alfalfa hay, because of its protein content, actually may become a more competitive ingredient in our diets. Now, as you talk with your nutritionist, there's another thing you need to really think about. On your dairy, are you feeding all your animals as one group, or do you have a high-producing group as well as a low-producing group, or if on a larger farm, several of these types of groups? This is your ability to change the level of protein based on the expected milk production that we might be getting out of a group of cows. In the cases where we have higher costs for soybean meal or protein sources, it becomes important that we think about whether or not we need to group our animals by production. Why do we think about this? Well, obviously those higher production groups have a higher need for crude protein or amino acids. So supplementing them will give us a higher return as opposed to lower production groups. So I encourage you to have a very frank conversation with your nutritionist concerning the choices of protein in your lactating cow dairy diets, as well as whether or not you need to be considering going to a grouping strategy that would allow you to more effectively use protein sources across your herd according to the level of milk production. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension.
Thanks, Mike. And this is Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State Research and Extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Next up now on Agriculture Today, our weekly wildlife management segment featuring former K-State wildlife specialist Charlie Lee. Charlie, we've information from a new study, and it looks at the relationship of prairie dogs to a common parasite, fleas, and in fact, fleas can be quite the bane of prairie dogs, very threatening to them, you say.
Yes, it's certainly a problem for prairie dogs. It can be a problem for other species in that ecosystem, including humans. And that is the sylvatic plague, which is caused by a bacterium, Yersinia pestis, that is a flea-borne disease of wildlife that is prevalent in primarily the southwest part of the United States, but also the western part of the United States. It is endemic in most of the western part of the United States. It can be devastating to prairie dog populations. Prairie dog mortality during plague outbreaks can exceed 90% and often leads to local extirpation of colonies. There are many other species that directly or indirectly depend upon prairie dogs, and their status as keystone species has certainly been debated. But the elimination of a prairie dog colony can impact many other species negatively.
Fleas can definitely disrupt the prairie ecosystem here. Can the fleas be controlled in any way?
Well, there are ways to control fleas in using vector control methods. You can apply insecticides to prairie dog burrows, and that's been done in some states that suffer from large outbreaks of plague, which decimates prairie dog populations. Much of this is done with the importance of black-footed ferret reintroduction efforts. Black-footed ferrets are a predator of prairie dogs, and you have to have prairie dogs in order to successfully reintroduce black-footed ferrets. So there's been a lot of work looking at ways to control flea numbers. The insecticides are nothing new and unusual. They're usually a dust that's applied directly into the burrow. But there's also been some work developing a vaccine for prairie dogs that's still in the experimental status. So when we have these large outbreaks of fleas and consequently increased likelihood of prairie dog plague events and die-offs, people are wondering, what does this mean in the long term? There's been a lot of effort looking at climate change, and regardless of the cause of climate change, I think most people can agree that it's slightly warming. And a group of researchers wanted to look at what are those environmental factors that influence flea numbers, and could those potentially change as a result of increasing temperatures and precipitation changes here in the future.
So this study directly observed that flea activity in prairie regions, not necessarily in Kansas, but very close to our state in some of the experiments. How did they approach this, and what did they find out?
Well, they studied 6 sites across the range of black-tailed prairie dogs. The sites were in Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Colorado, and New Mexico. They swabbed over 6,000 burrows during summers, and from those swabbings, they collected over 1,700 fleas from only about 600 burrows. The proportion of active burrows was more than 90% at all sites sampled, so they did have probably very healthy populations of prairie dogs, because usually when you don't have healthy populations of prairie dogs, you have a much higher ratio of inactive burrows to active burrows. And the patterns of fleas, the numbers of fleas that were collected, varied by region and the sampling session. But generally, the flea abundance decreased from early to late sampling session at the southern sites, while flea abundance increased from early to late sampling at the northern sites. There were 3 species of fleas that were commonly found much more frequently than some of the others. Those 3 species comprised 91% of the fleas that were collected. And as you would expect, the climate change or temperature differential changed depending upon which species was being researched.
But what was the finding in general as far as warmer temperatures impacting those flea numbers? Did they, in fact, escalate?
Their results indicated that reduced winter precipitation and elevated monthly temperatures are positively related to off-host flea abundance and prevalence in prairie dog burrows. Because these insect development rates increase with temperature, higher temperatures can lead to faster growth of the flea populations and an increase in the abundance and prevalence. Based on their results, they expected off-host flea abundance could increase between 180% and 500% under a change of 2 to 4 degree temperature increase. That can have some significant impacts. In addition, those hot, dry conditions during droughts would lead to decline in prairie dog body condition and reduce those prairie dogs' defenses to parasites, which can lead to higher flea numbers on the individual prairie dogs. And once those flea numbers increased to the correct ratio, the plague transmission could reach those levels that would trigger a major die-off. So I think as prairie dogs nest in the burrows, the temperatures for flea development are somewhat related to those burrow microclimates, but they're certainly also related to the environmental conditions.
So having this knowledge in pocket, can it be useful in future efforts in addressing the problem?
Well, I think it can certainly be a means to help us understand why flea numbers seem to be all over the board, and perhaps why some regions like Kansas are primarily free of sylvatic plague.
And hopefully, because it does, in fact, cause troubles with the prairie ecosystem, it'll remain that way, at least in this state. That is, the flea impacts on prairie dogs. Thanks for a glance at this today, Charlie Lee, longtime wildlife specialist with K-State Research and Extension. As we go today, we direct you to our podcast service. Each day's broadcast is loaded up for listening at your leisure at agtoday.net. You can also have it downloaded automatically to your mobile device each day. Find out more at agtoday.net. In the meantime, please be back with us right here tomorrow. Until then, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.